and Elizabeth Murphy.
Good afternoon. I request that Council receive the reports for information purposes only and not as policy. This should not be approved now since it would undermine the upcoming citywide planning process by overriding assumptions on land use patterns and density related to transit infrastructure without funding in place, and which may never come. So it shouldn't actually be endorsed for a specific type of transit until we know we have that funding in place, so that the planning around it will not be compromised if it has to shift. The Broadway subway, which I also strongly oppose, is not a done deal. It is framed as such, since it is not fully funded or cost affirmed or for regional city portion, yet land use is being planned with this already as an assumption. And also with that budget that is even for the Broadway subway portion, with a different technology like the rail, they could get all the way out to UBC with rail without that transit transfer point, which seems to be an issue. This report includes the figures that are vastly increased costs for the surface rail and minimizes the cost for the subway SkyTrain. So I dispute those figures, and many, such as Patrick Condon, also does. It is entirely premature to be endorsing a technology in advance of more accurate and detailed information about funding and what the deal might look like, including if it is a P3 or requires density bonusing and proper public consultation. The federal government is nowhere near ready to approve where the infrastructure money will go across Canada. Vancouver is already getting a large amount of federal funding currently allocated for transit, while others are lining up and have none, and not likely to be a priority to a government waiting to spread it around in an election year. They're already cutting a ribbon here. Why would they just put more money to cut the same ribbon? It doesn't really make sense. So I don't see the urgency. As Professor Patrick Condon's article says, it isn't green. Lighter infrastructure is more green, and also can be delivered sooner. It is the costliest option, which is depriving the rest of the city and the region, and it widens the wealth divide with the related tower luxury condos and out-of-scale development based on economics. The growth and ridership numbers are designed to present a predetermined outcome that favors SkyTrain. In fact, the current bus system to UBC has been underserved for over a decade in efforts to justify a subway. This could be rectified immediately with little cost if there was the will to do so. To put this in context, it is important to understand how Vancouver and UBC have developed over time. Vancouver is inherently a transit-oriented city because it was designed before the common use of the automobile as a streetcar city. It was an arterial grid. It has an arterial grid that is made up of short blocks, so everywhere is within a 10-minute walk of transit on an arterial. This was changed from streetcar to the current trolley buses. What we need is improved and more frequent electric transit service on all those arterials to serve people throughout the city. UBC was designed as a small campus at the end of a peninsula in the forest. It was never intended to be a city center. However, rather than building student and staff housing on site, UBC has been delivering its forested lands for market luxury condos to subsidize operations, which is unsustainable. It is increasingly becoming a development corporation rather than an educational institution. Metro Vancouver tried to rein in that unsustainable growth, but the developers influenced the province to take back direct control so they could continue unopposed. So now UBC has taxation without municipal representation and no regional oversight. Instead, UBC expects the regional transportation system to heavily subsidize a $7 billion subway to serve their condo growth, with students having to commute from across the region. This is the most unsustainable and undemocratic model in the province.
Ms. Murphy, you are out of time.
Oh,
yeah.
I have 2 more paragraphs if someone wants me to read them.
You are out of time. If you could say your last sentence, that would be fine. But
okay, thank you.
And you do have questions.
Okay, thank you. Transit is no longer about transporting people. It is mainly about delivering market condo development. For a fraction of the money proposed for this subway, the city and region could be much better served and delivered sooner to address the climate and affordability crisis.
Okay, thank you. And go ahead, Councillor Hardwick.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. I was struck by something that you said, that this is not a done deal. I've been told that the federal money is in place, not on the extension, but on the Broadway subway proper. Do you know something I don't know?
Well, it's not just a matter of the feds. You've got the provincial, which I understand is also allocated, but the final amounts, like originally it was supposed to be the city only providing 20% of the deal. Now it's gone up to 30%, and because the feds were going to also do 40, but because the price of the subway went up, it ended up that the city and the region ended up with a larger portion, and I don't believe all of that has been identified yet. But regardless, it still is within. They made a major change in Surrey about what technology they wanted. New council here, there is an ability to also reconsider where we're spending that money and what we could do with that. It could go much farther, be delivered much sooner, and also get us all the way out to UBC with what we already have been allocated. Plus, that may allow us to get more money for housing, which is really where we need additional funding.
So you had some comments also on the data that we're listening to. I have expressed concerns about some of the underlying data and assumptions affecting our housing targets and the fact that we are target oriented. Could you elaborate on your concerns around the underlying data, please?
Well, there's many issues there, but the overarching issue is around growth and number of units that is supposed to support that growth, and they don't jibe. Basically, there are the number of units usually are a factor of 2.2 persons per unit is typically what is being used in statistics and what they use with the regional growth strategy. And lately it's being used at a 1 to 1 or a 1.5 to 1 ratio, which is used to make it look like you need more units for the same population growth. Plus, the population growth itself, it seems like there's the numbers that were recently confirmed by staff just yesterday actually, was that there was twice as many new units anticipated over the next 10 years than there is anticipated population growth. So it isn't even on a one-to-one basis. So I think that a lot of these assumptions are not based on fact. It seemed like the numbers from the last council were just kind of upped for the sake of politics without necessarily being based on any kind of real data.
Evidence-based
Excuse me, we have a point of order. Go ahead, Councillor DeGenova. Just one second, I'll get your mic on. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Carr. I'm very much a rules-based person. If we're going to suggest that if someone else makes comments that could be seen as disparaging to staff.
This is not disparaging to staff. This is a fact.
Excuse me, Ms. Murphy, you do not have the floor with the mic. Councillor DeGenova,
thank you. I'm trying to be respectful, but I think that if people are talking about the data that has been presented to us, and if they're not being specific, I'm seeing that today as the presentation, and to call our staff political, I don't think is fair. So just because we did say it to another speaker, I feel that it's fair that we say it to everyone.
Okay.
Okay. Actually,
but it's your ruling, Madam.
No, actually, that's no.
Yes, I can. I'm sorry, but this is implying that I am being disparaging to staff. I am not being disparaging to staff. What I'm doing is I have a different interpretation of what those numbers mean, and I think.
Sorry, Ms. Murphy.
This
is not an argument between you and Councillor DeGenova or myself as chair. I support the point of order being made. If you would like to continue answering any question from Councillor Hardwick, that's fine. Councillor Hardwick, did you have another question?
Good. Yes, it was just because we had been talking earlier in questions about evidence-based decision-making, and I was trying to align data versus targets, but I realize that I'm now out of time. So.
Okay, that's yeah. You are. Thank you very much, Ms. Murphy. There are no more questions.
Yeah, but
and Mr. There are no more. Excuse me. There are no more questions. No, Ms. Murphy. Ms. Murphy.
Really.
Sorry. Can you turn her mic off, please?
To be saying that.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Ms. Murphy. This is not a debate. Ms. Murphy, the point of order has been raised about the way in which you have made some disparaging comments about staff, and that is not allowed in this chamber. This is to be a respectful chamber in which we treat our staff, each other, councillors treat each other and the public, and with respect for. Yeah, it's. Yeah, yes. The question. To question whether or not staff, pardon me? Yes, I just say political. To call our staff political is not appropriate. They are not. They are not. Yeah. Yeah. Ms. Murphy, I'm afraid that your time is up at this mic. And the next speaker is Larry Benj.